Professor Jan-Klod Zivia. Hello. We discussing your participation in the expert committee in Moscow. So I want to ask some general question about traffic and transport issues, and hear your opinion about some things that happens in Moscow now. First thing that many people in Russia sure that to solve the problems of congestions with many cities starting to have, in Moscow and St. Petersburg have huge problem of congestions, you need to build more roads and more junctions and more parkings to accommodate the cars, and then you will have no congestions. And this is the way they try to treat this problem. What do you think about this way of treating this problem?
Well, if you ask the question, you probably already know the answer. The answer is obviously that it's not a good idea to do that, because if you do that, the more you make it easy for cars to access the city center and to have parking, the more cars will be coming into the city center, and the more difficult it will be to regulate traffic. So obviously you have to coordinate the building of new highways and new intersections with the planning of a global mobility approach that will include all other modes of transport, including light rail and metro and buses, and try and make sure that people have direct access without necessarily using their cars to go to the center.
People say to this usually that there is two different group of people. One that use cars and they will never go to metro or surface transit, and one group that use surface transit, so they don't have cars, so we need to be surface transit for them.
Well, I think it's not that simple, because I think my opinion is that what people want in general, and everyone wants the same thing, is to get ideally direct transportation from where they come to where they go in as little time as possible, obviously. So in many places, the car is the best way to do that, especially in rural areas. But obviously, if you're in the city center, it's not that simple. For example, in Paris or in New York, you can go anywhere very easily with the public transport. So you can do that easily. I don't know about Moscow and St. Petersburg, but if you just have an approach where you make it easier for people to use their cars, as soon as people can afford a car, they'll want one, because they'll want to, obviously, because it's more comfortable, because they can make phone calls, because they listen to the radio, because they feel at home. But if you have fast, cheap, efficient, and comfortable public transportation systems, then maybe some people who actually use their cars will drop them. And if you make it a little bit more difficult for them to access the city center, but as opposed to that you have efficient public transport, then maybe some people will abandon their cars as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not two categories. It's not that simple.
Also, with these questions of public transit, sometimes especially in other cities, not in Moscow, but also in Moscow, politicians don't understand the secondary economics effect of public transit. They consider public transit only as a business, that it's you count the money that it brings, and if it's not bringing enough, then you need to remove the tram lane or the bus lane. Is this works like this, or you need to consider?
No, this is not true actually. In most places, especially for example in the United States, the politicians do not consider public transport as something profitable. They consider public transport as what they mostly consider as a necessary evil, something they need to do for the poor in most cities in the US. Yes, and they don't care whether it brings in money. They know it's a cost. And they say it's a burden, but they have to do it because some people have no choice. But that's a wrong approach as well, because you need to make an approach where public transport is attractive. And if you want to put as little money as possible in public transport, of course it's not going to be attractive, and people, only very poor people are going to use it. But if you make comfortable, efficient public transport, including with modern technology and Wi-Fi, and then people will use it because they'll have better accessibility to where they want to go.
Mm-hmm. When 2 years ago, new mayor of Moscow was appointed, it was first time that mayor was appointed and not elected, Sergei Sobyanin his name, he get from President Medvedev this time the main goal of his mayorship should have been to fight problems of traffic and congestions. That's what they said when he came into the office. And he started very quickly to do some different steps to try to fight this. And I would like to describe these steps and have your opinion on it. First step that he done relatively like 2 months or 3 months, I think, after he went in office, he permitted parkings on sidewalks in many streets and boulevards on Moscow. And he says that he was able to have 400,000 more parking spaces, and he says that it's one of his achievements, that he is now more parkings. He said this is a temporary idea, but so far it's still there. Is this a good idea to permit parking on sidewalks generally and increase the amount of parking spaces in central city and in sleeping areas?
It's interesting because what you're saying makes me think of what the way American planners and European planners would think maybe 30 or 40 years ago or 50 years ago, when the automobile was considered as to be the only solution for the future. But everyone has now gone back to a different approach. Obviously, allowing more parking in city centers will attract more cars and increase congestion. So what you need to do is try and make it as attractive as possible not to use the car to go to the city center. So obviously adding parking spaces is not a good solution. Now, there's no perfect solution, but this is not the best solution.
In parking on sidewalks, for example, we had the main street Tverskaya. You've been in Moscow.
Well, it's even worse. No, I mean, the more parking you allow in the city center, the more cars are going to come to the city center, and the more congestion you'll have, and so accessibility will be harder and harder.
Mm-hmm. Also, second thing that he's done, he's introduced bus lanes, and it's never happened before it in Russia, in any city in Russia. So he introduced bus lanes in many radial streets that go from city center to the circular road. And there is huge discussion in Moscow about this. Many people unhappy about this because they say, "Why the buses? Nobody uses them, and they go empty on these lanes." Well, he's introduced it. He was the first to introduce it. Do you think it's a good idea to have bus lanes?
Well, it's all a matter of coordination. Bus lanes just like that doesn't mean anything. If it's a bus lane that is coordinated with interconnection and special parkings that are outside the city to connect to the city center, then people might use the buses. Also, bus lanes have to be very well designed so that cars cannot use them. Mm-hmm. The problem is very often, I don't know how it is in Moscow, but very often cars go on the bus lanes and are not punished, so it doesn't help. But if a bus lane, or even what they call now a bus rapid transit system, can be very efficient if it is connected and coordinated with other modes of transport.
Uh-huh.